Hello, I'm Ian Scales. You're watching TelecomTV's M2M channel, and we're going to be embarking upon a new program called The Big Conversation. This is a program where we want your participation. So in the box below there, we want you to fill in your questions, your responses to the program you're about to see. The first topic on this first big conversation is about boundaries. What's M2M? What's Internet of Things? Are there differences? Does it matter?
Well, M2M was really where it all started. It was provide connectivity to stuff that's out there and get data back from it, and then provide efficiencies, if you like, for activities for enterprises that are out there. So it was very B2B, business to business. It was very directed, what we call point solutions. So it's stuff coming from one place to another place, and that's about it. And it was at a level that saved costs for typically operational reasons. So that's really where M2M started. And then it developed from there. And where we've got to now is at the point where we can start to think about a universe of things connected. And your fridge connected. Not quite sure what you'd want to connect it for, but we'll come to that. But yeah, everything connected. And then data coming from those and being used in a number of different ways, not just for one purpose. Now, there are obviously privacy issues there and trust issues and so forth, but that's the principle, really, behind Internet of Things, that we have a very large population of a mixture of devices out there, and we're getting data from them, and we have the opportunity to use that data in a number of different ways, not just a vertical silo type of approach. So it's the sort of one extreme to the other. So the difference between M2M and Internet of Things is one of scale, because it's a lot more, and scope, that it's not just one fixed sector, it's a whole universe of sectors and universe of applications.
What's the difference between the Internet of Things and M2M?
People tend to use these terms fairly interchangeably as if they meant the same things, and there aren't agreed definitions that distinguishes between them. It's certainly the case that telecoms operators tend to talk in terms of M2M rather than Internet of Things. If it were me, I would say let's use M2M to refer to the connectivity and communications aspects of a bigger architecture that included other aspects of connectivity between sensors and objects and servers and applications. But I'm aware that not everybody uses it that way.
Can a smartphone app be an M2M client?
What brought M2M into existence, really, is use of the internet. So it's data from remote devices coupled with use of the internet that really defines M2M as being M2M. So we would leave out things like key fobs and things like that, as yes, they use wireless, yes, they use local controllers, local radio and stuff like that, but that's not an M2M application. It might attach to an M2M application. By the same token, we would say that an iPhone is not an M2M device because it does all sorts of other things besides M2M. However, it can be used in M2M applications for wellness monitoring and healthcare and stuff like that, and then it can become an M2M application device for that particular situation. So, yeah, I think we draw quite tight boundaries about what we consider to be M2M and what we consider not to be M2M. But the internet and the use of the internet is the fundamental point about it. Because basically, what you're looking for is not M2M is, yes, it's connectivity, but it's much more than that. It's really introducing new services, and that's the point of M2M, is to introduce new services.
What's the role for local government?
Well, I think as a customer of the output of this, they are a big player in this space. I mean, one of the reasons why we don't see more of this deployed is their natural tendency is to go to a large system integrator and say, do this for me. And of course, that system integrator just takes its favourite technology partners and puts together a solution and charges X million pounds to do it. And only the very largest and richest public sector municipalities can actually go and do something with that. And they have to be trying to solve a very real problem. I think if you can break it down into much smaller chunks and know that you could deploy new streetlight infrastructure, for example, I mean, one of the startups in the IoT forum, they've produced ballast technology for streetlights. It increases your power efficiency, but they've also built a mesh network so all lights can talk to each other. Well, you don't have to do a lot to that mesh network to open it up and say, okay, every manhole cover, every electricity substation, intrusion detection, all sorts of different public sector elements, street furniture, etc. They could piggyback off that network if we opened it up that way, and then just pass through that backbone and back to make some sorts of decisions. And I think once public sector, the public sector group or local councils understand that they could do this a piece at a time, because that's always the problem is you want to go and do the solution, you have to throw millions of pounds at it. Well, if you could just do a village and just test that out, okay, that's there now. We have the backbone in, and we put the backbone in because we wanted to reduce energy consumption. Well, now I can then add these sensors and use that same network and add these sensors. And I might use completely different services and different service providers in the cloud, but I've given them access to that data and I've presented them with that data. So now I can grow, I can spend £50,000, £100,000, £500,000 over a series of years and constantly incrementing the value as we go forward and not having to imagine from day one exactly what this entire thing needs to look like. You would not deploy a low power radio mesh network across a city just to gather data from manhole covers. You won't do it just to count cars in the street. You might do, but you probably wouldn't. If there's a real financial benefit from deploying the infrastructure, and that could be because you save energy for every streetlight that's there, well then, that then pays for itself. Now you have the infrastructure that you can layer value on top of. And as long as you have the ability or you've considered that you could scale this over time, you can then open that wireless networking up for various different devices to talk to. And in fact, even that local council could then sell access to that network to the energy companies and say, well, if you want an alternative route for smart meter data, well, here's one here. So wherever there is a street light, if you're within 50 meters, 100 meters of a street light, your smart meter could talk onto that backbone. So I think if there is there's enough of a financial driver to deploy something to solve a real problem, if you consider that solution then can add scale over time, well then that makes it a lot easier for councils to justify doing it. And it doesn't have to be streetlights, it could be something else. But even the streetlight idea, you could add an access point to that streetlight, for example, and offer community broadband for people who can't afford broadband at home. So there's a lot we can do with it, and I think if we think about long term, if you lay these foundations and build on top of it, what could it do for the community, what could it do for the county that you're in, and in fact, what could it do for UK PLC in general?
Who do you expect the big players in this market to be?
One of the interesting things about M2M is the opportunity it offers for enterprises who are not telecoms players to become service providers. So some big companies who are not traditional providers of communication services can now find themselves selling not just boxes or things, but services. So Amazon's Kindle is one example. Then Nissan's Car Wings is another example. Actually, there's a telecoms company, or more than one, behind that application, but the customer relationship for the service, not just for the product, is now with the enterprise, the big company that provides the package service.
What role should telcos play in M2M?
We have this view about telcos that they are just connectivity, they only provide a network. But actually when you stand back from it and you think, well, what do they actually provide in that? They're very good at manipulating data. Because it's data that drives those networks, and it's data of the billing and all those kinds of things that sit behind it. So actually you've got to take into account that operators are very good at manipulating data, but for specific purposes. So what they would need to do in the Internet of Things environment is to be able to adapt and use that data for different purposes and develop different applications and so forth. And then they're up against data analytics providers, for example, who do specialist work in that area, consultancy work even in that area, and provide real services for enterprise typically. The way that we see the position of the mobile operators is one of scale and also volume. So the idea that they can serve a very large number of people rather than an enterprise activity, they can serve a wide population. And they can also provide data requirements for that wide population as well. A relatively small, limited amount of data, for example. So I think that there is a tremendous opportunity in there for mobile operators to create new service opportunities in areas that aren't there yet. And there's obviously, because it's an area that there isn't a service yet, there's no competition there either. So they're not competing against people that they already sell services to. So I think that's probably where they will be focused.
Thanks for watching, but don't go yet. Put your questions, your observations in the panel below, and then next time we do the big conversation, we may reflect them back to you. Once again, thanks very much for watching. Please join us on the M2M channel next time when our starting question will be about standards.